You're listening to Art Said Podcast, episode number 1, Why This Podcast? Welcome to the Art Said Podcast, conversations through the perspective of the arts and education, hosted by educators and artists Shawna Longo and Edric Debos. Hello, listeners. Welcome to our inaugural podcast episode. My name is Shawna Longo.
I'm Edric Debos.
Today, we hope to answer the question, why this podcast? We're going to give you a glimpse into our educational philosophies and experiences that led us to this point where we decided to share our thoughts, as well as others, about the arts and education on a new platform, this podcast. Really, this podcast comes out of years of experience. Myself, this is Shawna talking. I have 22 years teaching music at all levels, elementary, middle school, high school, and I've done just about every realm of music you can think of: band, orchestra, choir, general music, music tech. I have supervisory experience. I actually just moved into a new role as a district supervisor of visual performing arts, and I'm excited to get back into the administration world. I've also been on a board of education for the past 7 years, so I kind of bring the perspective of a board of education member, of the perspective of a parent, and a teacher to kind of round out our conversations.
My name is Edric Debos. I've been an art teacher for about 15 years. My experiences are in a variety of, from high school to middle school to elementary school. I've had experiences being an arts integration facilitator for the district that I've worked in. And that has really kind of given me the experience of working with other teachers in other situations and other schools at different levels. And that's really basically it. Most of what I'm presenting is from the perspective of a teacher. So it's really experiences in the classroom and in different types of schools and dealing with teachers in other subject areas.
All right, so let's clear a few things up. Really, it's all about, we want to get rid of the fluff, and we actually want to say something original in how we work with other teachers within schools.
Yeah, this begins really, I think, from, our experience of working together really begins with focusing on arts integration, which is us going as arts teachers. I teach art, teach music, us going into other classrooms to collaborate and work with other teachers on arts integration projects. So that's kind of where it begins. And as you do that, like with anything that you do for a number of years, you gain certain experiences, you see different kinds of projects, you start to feel out what does and what doesn't work. And so, honestly, this is, for me, I think about this in the same way I think about my children. I often say to them, what do I owe you? Do I owe you a college education? Do I owe you a house? And I always say, what I owe you is the benefit of my experience. That, so what I've been through, I've seen some things, I've done some things. I owe you, that I have to find a way to package somehow and give to you. So that's really what this is about.
And really, we want to be real and be honest about, we're not going to just say everything's fantastic all the time. There are bumps in the road, as any good work that you're going to do is going to have bumps in the road. And that's when you really grow and learn and expand your abilities as a teacher and just a professional. So we were talking about the arts and with arts integration. And a lot of times people put content areas within silos within schools. And so they really separate them out. Here's music, here's art, here's science, here's math. And everybody's doing separate things, and there's not a lot of cross pollination happening. There's not a lot of transferring of those ideas or making those connections for students. And that's something I believe is very, very important in education, is making as many connections for kids as possible. That's when the learning really sticks and they grow in their understanding and as human beings. And so you can have that definition of silos in education where they are distinctly different areas of focus. Or we can think of silos in kind of a new light. And Edric kind of shined this light for me and helped me to understand a new definition of silos, just like within the past month, I would say.
You're really talking about silos as places of storage, right? You have to store
Yes.
certain ideas in certain places. So this idea of cross-pollination is an issue because most teachers tend to teach the way in which they were taught. And they tend to be taught in separate silos or separate areas, separate content, which makes sense to a degree. But just to go back to what you said earlier about the cross-pollination of content areas, I think when students have the ability to take what they've learned and apply it to something, So it's not simply a matter of the amount of information you're storing in your head. It's about, can you take that information and that understanding and actually do something with it? Then it applies to real world. Then you have more of a depth of understanding on the part of the students.
Right. So it's a shift to think of silos as these kind of storage of information that we can then almost like ingredients. Each silo, each content area has different ingredients that we need all of them to pull together to actually create a recipe and to cook something. If we're going to go into like the food realm in terms of analogies. And so you need all those different silos of content areas and knowledge and skills that the kids learn to then be able to bring them together to have it have more meaning for them.
But it also has something to do with the way in which the school is set up, or the mission of the school, the understanding the teachers have of what the mission of the school is. Because if you don't understand the relations between those content areas, then you yourself cannot actually teach it. So one example, again, about fluff and understanding things in a real way. Sean and I sat together and listened to a podcast on a couple of STEM educators, and they were really talking about STEM and their STEM into STEAM. And what they were basically saying was, yeah, first we have to get the STEM thing right, which is true. First we have to get the STEM thing right. But then they said, and then they were saying something to the effect of, well, we don't really necessarily need to just include, some music or a song in there, or necessarily draw a picture. That's not really important. STEM in and of itself really needs to be clearly established. And that's kind of an example of educators not really understanding the value of the arts, right? So when you go from
Absolutely.
STEM into STEAM, and the reason the arts are there in something like STEAM is really because there are no design standards in public education. So that's an attempt to, because there's plenty of design issues and ways of learning and ways of approaching an idea in the arts. It's really very much about design. So this inclusion of arts in STEM is really about an inclusion of a design element, a way of thinking about process.
And listen, we could go down the rabbit hole of like the arts are just trying to advocate for themselves or put themselves within the STEM world. And it's like, no, 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 it's okay. We're good. We're good on our little island, and you're good on your island, and we need to fill both those silos. But then, what can we do bringing them together is really what it comes down to. And really, I'm going to go back to that. Cooking reference. And so I always love to talk about like the alphabet soup of education, that there are acronyms for everything out there. We fill our minds with our content area silos in order to start making those connections across content areas. So there are more acronyms for initiatives than we can ever keep up with. You have ELL, SEL, DEI, IDEA, STEAM, STEM. I mean, I could go on and on and on forever with the amount of acronyms that exist in education. Actually, if you Google that, there's some really funny lists that people have put together. And it's absolutely, a lot of times it's just kind of like calling something old something new. Really, it's just an evolution for that. But the content specific knowledge and skills that fill up our students' silos help lay that foundation where we can drive higher order thinking to make connections across content areas. And that's really the premise behind arts integration. And know that this podcast is not an arts integration podcast. This is about the arts in and through education. So we're going to talk about a lot of things. It's just today we're kind of leaning on that a little bit. But you need everything we're doing in all those silos to create that alphabet soup, to drive all of those initiatives. And so we look forward to a broader discussion about how the arts play a role within education and educational initiatives that affect arts education. That's really kind of the heart of where we're going to go with this podcast.
It's really about advocacy, I think. So it's really advocating, because I think what I've learned over the time of just teaching, doing arts and projects with other teachers, presenting for teachers, presenting at different workshops. I'm starting to understand that advocacy is just, you have to clarify your viewpoint, you have to clarify what you understand, what you're trying to say, and then just find different ways of saying that over and over again in different contexts, right? In different situations. So when you're talking with teachers, it's a particular conversation. When you're talking to supervisors, administrators, it's a different kind of conversation. When you're talking to the public, it's a different kind of conversation. So it's really about, what I'm finding is just advocating for the arts, to explain what the connections are, what the value of those connections are. But more specifically, I think broadly speaking, people will say, "Oh yes, the arts." it's, it's so much more to life. It's but specifically in terms of education, how do you start to break down what the arts contribute to other areas, and what are those similarities? Because once you find those connections, then you can have a more meaningful combination of ideas, connections.
Well, it's just like you said with the STEM podcast we listened to. Like, it's about, you can have that meaningful conversation about STEAM because it's an understanding of, listen, the arts role is in the design principles because there are no standards that drive that. You can find them a little bit in terms of engineering and next generation science standards, and there's design within our art standards innately, but how can you kind of cross pollinate that? And so I think that's really important. So listen, it's not about like um the arts are, the end all be all, but for us it's about making those connections. We want to increase advocacy and exposure, and expand the role of arts within our schools, how they're looked at. It's not just decoration, it's not just entertainment, that there's something meatier behind there, and there's more that can be offered to other initiatives within schools. No matter what initiative comes down the pike, I've always found that my role was always like, all right, let me figure out how I'm already doing this in music class. And a lot of times arts teachers, and I don't want to generalize, but I will, based on my experience,
Right.
I will say,
Yes.
they tend to be like the radar goes up and they shut down, and this has nothing to do with me, and let me be in my arts world. And so that doesn't really help with increasing those connections. And so for me, it's always been, let me figure out how I'm already doing this, or what I might be able to do to be a part of this. And it's about increasing that teamwork within schools, that we don't end up on an island all to ourselves in our own little world where we are just entertainers or decorators, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Right. So for me, the question that hit me first that I had to ask myself was, what can be the role of the arts in public education? So so how do you connect the conversation about what you understand the value of the arts are to the sciences, to social studies, to history? How do you make those connections? Asking that one question: what can be the role of the arts in public education? And to be honest, I have that little bit of a chip on my shoulder, because I know that arts people. I had this one science teacher friend of mine, and she would talk about the artsy fartsy people.
We've all heard that.
And and I get, basically, based on what her educational experience was, why she sees things in that way. But I think, again, you have to explain in as many different ways as you can, in many different situations as you can, that the arts, there are embedded within the arts certain practices that connect to other content areas. So the role of what the arts can be expanded. It doesn't compromise or take away from from what you're teaching as an arts teacher. Arts for art's sake, yes, absolutely. Arts for art's sake, absolutely. However, when you have enough of a foundation, you can start making connections to expand the role, if that's where you want to go with your work. Again, if that's where you want to go with your work, expand the role of the arts in terms of the mission of your school.
And listen, we've heard it all, but I mean, and you're going to get challenges and you're going to get questions, and you have to be able to kind of like calm your emotional innate response and be able to have a research-based response. And hopefully continue listening to these episodes. We're going to give you that research base to be able to help you inform these conversations with teachers within your school. By the way, non-arts and arts teachers, you might get pushback on from all aspects. And so it doesn't minimize the work you do. I don't have time for this. You do have time. It's just looking at what you're doing through a different light. You're not changing or adding to what you're doing. It's just changing how you do it. And so a lot of people say, I don't have the energy to add anything to my plate. I already have too much to cover in my curriculum. It's just kind of shifting the way you're looking at it, or the way you're approaching something you're already doing in your classroom.
So it's really about the connections with what you're already doing. It's really key. Understand it as that there are things that are inherent and embedded in the arts practices that relate to practices in other areas, and that's where you start.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you. This was episode 1. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you'll stick around and listen to further episodes, and we thank you for your time. Have a great day, everybody.
Take care.